Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a Happy New Year, if one is still allowed to say that at the end of January. Welcome to a new edition of ESBG Spotlight, which is meanwhile 3 years old. We started in early 2019, as some among you may remember, and we're more too pleased to see that it has been a successful debating format. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for regularly joining us, and thank you for your questions and the discussions with our guests. For our third anniversary, so to speak, we have another brilliant guest speaker. The governor himself of Malta's central bank, Mr. Edward Scicluna, has accepted our invitation, for which we are truly grateful. Good afternoon, Governor. Thank you for joining, and welcome to ESBG Spotlight.
Good afternoon.
Let me perhaps quickly introduce you to our audience. You are, in fact, not only the governor of the Central Bank of Malta, but you also serve as the deputy chairman of the Malta Financial Services Authority. From 2013 to 2020, you served as Malta's Minister for Finance, and before that, Governor, you called Brussels your home when you were an MEP and vice chairman of the Okun committee, which was in the period from 2008 to 2013. You're a man of extraordinary experience and knowledge, and we will be eager and pleased to listen to you. The topic of your discourse will be, "It's the labor supply, stupid?" in which you will elaborate on labor supply developments during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just before giving you the floor, Governor, please let me point out one small thing for our audience. As always, please don't hesitate to ask your questions via the questions tool on the right part of your screen. And now, without any further ado, Governor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'd like to thank also the ESBG for the kind invitation. I mean, this is the way it came. I mean, some months ago, I was approached by Peter Simon, who was an ex-colleague of mine in the European Parliament, who said, "Look, choose any topic you like, but we'll, would welcome you to give this present." So this is how it came about. I mean, why would I choose the topic? First of all, apologies, I'm not calling anybody stupid, definitely not. It's one of those saying, American ones, where it's related to the economy. So, I mean, not to miss it, you say it's the economy, stupid. It's a saying, so one should not read too much into that. But again, why do I choose the labor supply? I mean, with this pandemic, there are so many things happening and really with big magnitudes. And something which tickled me all along was the labor supply. It's not just the variant and the virus, but also the labor supply from an economic point of view. So I would like to see what I'm looking, and like with others, all the data today is public, and this is just my own opinion on it. I mean, next week, the Governing Council will be meeting for its monetary policy meeting, so I will not delve into speculating, definitely not. It's not my intention here. It's just an important economic variable which is behaving oddly, and I would like to raise questions and say what's happening here. So this is my wish for this, this presentation to read, so to speak. I'll share the presentation. Oops. It's already shared. Yes, the pandemic is a multidimensional challenge. And, I mean, whether on the health crisis, I mean, there's the photo on the right-hand side taken in Malta. It actually won a photo competition because it grabs, the crisis situation in the health sector with hospitalization and mortality to boot, which is really hitting a lot of countries around the world, really, in different degrees. Obviously, our concern is the economic crisis, which has resulted in the restrictions which were necessary to contain this health hazard, which has killed sectors the airport. I mean, who can't forget the scenes of empty streets or empty airports or empty hotels? It was really very surreal, and nobody's going to forget this so easily. And therefore, the repercussions on the social scene, not just the mental health, families grouped there, cooped in their homes for weeks on end, couldn't but have certain impact. So from every angle you could look at, there's big ramifications. Again, ours is the economic, and as I said, why am I sort of concerned, or I bring this concern? Why should it be concern? I mean, things change. Cycles have happened in the past, crisis and then normalization. Well, this is a global shock, just like the financial crisis and the war, Second World War before it. This is something which is big, really, really big. And one would expect when such shocks happen at a global level, they will have a permanent impact. Of course, there will be sort of some normalization after the war. People started, behaving, life turned to normal. But today we still remember and the impact on the lives of families and children remain. So we expect that with the financial crisis and also with this pandemic, certain impacts will remain permanent. Some of them. We also, we notice when certain shocks like that happen, that we have like a watershed. Were you born before the war or after the war? Were you born, when did it happen? Before that date or after that date? So we expect this to happen also with COVID, that things would have changed so much that one would refer to before or after this event. Trends are broken, and we always talk about structural changes. That's what they are. And unfortunately, our models always seek continuity and time series and looking back in order to try and read the future. And this breaks it all up. I mean, there's no such thing as a continuity or a trend. When there are structural changes, they are big and mess up, so to speak, our beautiful equations and nice and continuity. It all goes down and washed away. So one needs to know what is happening. And especially here where we tie economic activity with our personal lives, whether it was save, consume, work, leisure, it's all tied to our personal life. And if there are changes pre and post COVID, we want to know and ask ourselves whether they are temporary or permanent. Now, before COVID, of course, there were trends in the labor market, and they've been evolving over time since the Industrial Revolution, when workers were so afraid that the industrialization will rob them of their jobs, which didn't happen. But we said the same for computerization. And now we're talking about digitalization and artificial intelligence with the same concern that who would take over the machines or what would happen to people and their lives and so on. So these trends were being discussed, debated, and will continue. They were before the COVID. The same for the labor force participation rate. We've always wanted, especially in countries like Malta, where the female participation rate was low, where we did all fiscal measures we could think of in order to raise the female participation up to the male counterpart and remove the obstacles like childcare and so on. We did the same with people who retired, and we want them to be active for their own health, for the health of the economy, for everybody. Active aging, and we're so successful in that and prolonging, not for health reasons, life has been prolonged, but we wanted also economic activity, the personal, family, and so on, to continue normal as can be. We can also refer to the increasing immigration, where through globalization, we had, over time, in fact, I have a chart which I will show you. We had also the morphing of blue and white collar workers. Before, I still remember we had education institutions for blue collar technical people, mechanics and so on, and the white collar clerical at that time. Well, they've morphed into knowledge workers where you need science and maths and also a mixture of both. Work patterns. Telework was already being in some corporations on their agenda, especially for people who needed it, pregnant women or mothers with children and or parents with children. That was evolving slowly, and before the COVID, and we'll see what happened with COVID. And the same for labor turnover and workplace loyalty. We've been seeing pre-COVID an increase in labor turnover and also a reduction in workplace loyalty. The employer who will give you the grandfather clock when you retire after 45 years of work is now becoming the exception rather than the rule. And the last is the perception regarding wealth, work, health, and the environment. I don't have time enough to go into these, but I just want to mention them, that they are evolving and changing over time. However, and these are the charts. I mean, the first one on the left-hand side is the bars are net immigration. With falling population in Europe, getting older, we were seeing more and more migrants coming in and accepted in the workforce because we needed them. Even a small island like Malta couldn't grow at high rates of growth without getting people from all over the world, not just from the European Union, of which we were members, but also from as far as Nepal, Philippines, Indonesia. You'd be surprised how many nationalities would be in your labor force because of net migration. All this was evolving slowly, in reply to the needs of the population, which was falling. And the same for active aging on the right-hand side, bottom there. We see the number of the over 65 in the labor force growing with time. And now, it's just a revision. I don't want to go to be so technical, although we have an equation there. But economists put a lot of emphasis on output, on our standard of living depends on it. Now, of course, there's the question of quality of life, but at the same time, we can't we cannot afford whatever we need unless the country produces the output. And every output is limited depending on that's what we call the potential. Output is limited by its factors of production, whether it's capital, the equipment, labor, and the technical progress, which is there in the equation represented by letter A. Now, we know that our standard of living depend on it. The more output per capita, the better the potential standard of living would be. The technical progress, either we have it independent or embodied in the capital or in the labor through training, expertise, the know-how. It's all there. So technology is everywhere, either on its own with the letter A, or what we call that is the Cobb-Douglas production function, which has been used by past economists like Solo to measure also our country's productivity as well, because there is a residual, which we call total factor productivity. I'm saying that because labor is so essential for our standard of living, because it's an input in that production function. Now, if we look at the macro side, we also realize that potential output, through cyclical behavior, actual output does not necessarily be on the same path. So it will be either under or over that potential, in which case it will create inflationary pressures, while during recessions, the actual output will fall below that potential. And it's in our interest to make sure that we don't lose that output, but by trying to obtain that potential output. And here we have for the European area an estimate of the potential output. It's one estimate. It could be slightly different depending on which model use, but you will see that there were times when, especially after the financial crisis, when actual output was below the potential, and there were times when it was above, and therefore got to the notice of central banks around the, depending on the country concerned. And on the right hand side, we can see the output gap, which is so essential for policymakers to see where we stand, whether it's the Commission, whether the European Central Bank, whether national banks. We're always observing this output gap. So this is the kind of analysis we have and the tools. And the idea is to see whether they are now will remain so. Another relationship which I would like to review with you is the Phillips Curve, which came in the late 50s and early 60s, and which showed that governments, remember at that time, after the Beveridge Report in the UK in 1942, governments in the democratic world had objectives of full employment, price stability, a fair distribution of income. They became economic objectives of the elected governments. And Phillips noted this relationship by observing the data for unemployment and the increase in wages or inflation, which brought in a schedule like that, which is on the left-hand side, which to the governments presented a trade-off, a menu, so to speak, a la carte. Would you prefer, would the country prefer, would the taxpayers, the voters, the electorate prefer relatively higher unemployment for the sake of bringing down inflation, or else you would do with a little bit of inflation, but at least reaching full employment? And as students, we were always taught that in the UK, the option was for full employment, while in Germany, at least at that time, because of the history and historical experience, hated inflation at all costs, even at the sake of not reaching the full employment within this menu, I must say. Well, there were a lot of critics, and they were proved right that this schedule or relationship was not stable at all, and it shifted with time. I don't want to go into the technical details, but if you can see the different time periods where the relationship became almost vertical. So in the long run, this no longer exists, but we still talk about it and refer to it and see if this will come out of hibernation or not. Now, in trying to reach full employment, no matter how much you push and so on, and you're trying to reduce unemployment, and you know that the electorate will keep you accountable for what you have promised them. And the economist has said, look, there is a limit to how much unemployment you can bring down, because a lot of the part of the unemployment are through is for frictional reasons, people coming out of school, people changing jobs, seasonal, and sometimes even structural. Industries fold up because they are no longer competitive. You can't do anything about that except, look at the supply side and see what. For example, this very today on the FT, there was something about the Chancellor and trying to ease on the welfare state because of friction and unemployment. So there is what is called the natural rate of unemployment. In other words, there is a limit to how much you can reduce that rate. But more sophisticated deny rule. In other words, it's not just a natural, but the non-accelerating inflation rate. In other words, where there is a rate of unemployment, which if respected, you'd keep inflation steady. If you try to reduce it, it will be at your own cost, because it will create a lot of inflation. Now, it's better said theoretically than done. Try to model it, and as you can see, that shaded part is the variations of different rates for different periods of time of NAIRU, depending on which model is used. and so this is crucial. And as we will see that this is now, there's a lot of uncertainty where this Nauru stands at the moment for all reasons which are happening, the pandemic having an effect on the labor market. But we'll come back to it. Another relationship is what is called the Okun's law, where you have a relationship between changes in GDP and changes in unemployment. So if you look at the right bottom quadrangle, you'll see that at periods of high economic growth are, as expected, met with changes, negative change, lower unemployment, changes in unemployment, but on the lower end, reduced. While if it is recession, then you will expect that unemployment will increase. But having said that, if you notice that, and there are two outliers on the left-hand side, one is 2020, marked in red, with showing that with big negative changes to the GDP, the inflation didn't rise that much. So that's curious. While the top blue one, which is not marked, is the 2009 financial crisis observation, which showed that negative growth really spiked the unemployment higher, by 2 percentage points on average. But this is important. We'll come again to it. The beverage curve, compares unemployment rate with the vacancy rate to see how tight is the market. This is something which is in the news today as well. We're whenever you read, you'll find that strange things are occurring where normally, the higher the vacancy rate, the lower the unemployment. And that would be a tight market when there's a lot of vacancy, a high degree of vacancies. That's a tight market. And whilst the other way around, with high unemployment and low vacancies, it is not. We also use the ratio of vacancies to the unemployed, which captures this tightness. And I don't want to complicate matters, but if this curve were to shift out, it means that we have matching inefficiencies. In other words, if we have problems that there are mismatches of people seeking jobs and employers seeking labor, if there are mismatches and for various reasons, and it's happening also today, then you will get higher rates for the same level of vacancies. You'll get higher rates of unemployment, depending on how you're going to define it. When I say unemployment, I will explain that it could be also underemployment, and with lower hours worked. But just to give an example, and I referred to it just earlier in today's FT, where in the UK, the welfare state rules of those who are unemployed are changed. That those who register now will lose benefits and they are more stricter now, if they don't seek work outside their region and so on and so forth. And this is done because of the mismatches and also this strange high vacancy rate on one end and unemployment on the other. The next is we have the US, the European area, other advanced countries, and the emerging. These are the four. And the black line is the hours worked. And as you can see, the pandemic really hit hours worked globally, whichever region it is. They went down in a most savage manner, by 12, 15%, and even more in the emerging economy. So you can imagine the devastating effect it had on work. But this chart then splits up, the hours worked, how they were lost, and we'll see a different picture for different regions. In the US, it was marked mostly by the unemployment and fall in the participation rate. So that's the blue and the brown. In the European area, the hours were lost due to not high unemployment, which was not the case, but less hours worked for each person because of the different schemes which were presented. So there was underemployment. People were officially on the staff list, so to speak, on the payroll list, but actually doing very little work. I mean, people in restaurants maybe giving food out, orders and delivered, and home deliveries, but not the restaurants was empty, but they were paid the salary because of government support, and the same for other advanced countries. So this, while in the emerging countries, people just got lost. The labor force participation rate really fell in a severe way, and we don't know whether they will come back to the labor force. We'll see about that in the emerging countries. In the US and EA, and the European area, we're going to find different parts because the schemes and policies were different. In the the blue one is for the US, and as you can see, the unemployment rate really shot up because the compensation was on the unemployment benefits, so to speak, but not to keep people on the payroll. So the schemes were different, and as a result, unemployment spiked. However, what is also surprising is that after the event, once we started, we're not yet there, towards normalization, the unemployment fell as fast, I say, as it went up, although it hasn't yet come back to where it was before. Notice the European area had different schemes trying to keep people on the payroll, and that succeeded in avoiding that spike which occurred in the US. Then we can go to activity rates, and again both regions, the US and the EA, fell abruptly. However, the bigger hit is definitely in the US, and it hasn't yet come up to pre-COVID. It looks like in the EA it has, but it's hiding. One have to be very careful how to interpret that. Hiding a lot of underemployment, wastage, slack, whatever you would like to call it, behind that curve. In fact, one of the difficulties in this area is one who is not even sure of the figures themselves. The US, for example, labor statistics have been revised in an unprecedented manner. They got it wrong. I mean, statisticians will present whatever data they managed to gather, and because the reports were coming late, they had to make very big revisions, which will throw the markets, financial markets and economists and whoever observe, really will shake them. The one picture is, especially in the US, month by month they are observing the number of jobs created, and then 2-3 months later you find that it was wrong, and then it was revised up, but it could have been both ways. This I wouldn't go too much deep into this, but I just want to compare the 2009, which is on the left-hand side, post-financial crisis, where unemployment really continues peaking up and up, until 2013 and also 2014, and then it started declining since then. Employment is the blue line, And as you can see, the pandemic crisis hit the employment down in the euro area. And now it's picking up. But in the meantime, giving the same picture we've been given in the previous charts, the unemployment barely increased, and unlike what happened in the post-financial crisis. We're coming back to this beverage curve. What is interesting here is that different times this group of observations have been shifting up to the right-hand side and top. So if you look at the US, you'll find the pink group of observations are representing the pre-financial crisis. So for the vacancies, the relation between vacancies and unemployment rate, this shifted and became less efficient post the financial crisis. And in the US, because they have monthly data, and at the very top are a group of monthly data and the latest reported, we have a further shift out showing that there are more and more mismatches of people looking for jobs and employers advertising for work, and these are not being filled up. So this is the picture in the US. While in the European area, you had this shift between the pink and the red, but the dark red, we haven't had it. Although I must say this is quarterly data, we don't have monthly data in the euro area, so we cannot compare with the left-hand side chart. But definitely the quarter which we have observed in, I think the third quarter of 2020 of last year is really on top, and it looks like there will be also a similar shift in that beverage curve which we observe. They call it the big resignation. It did not occur on a large scale in the euro area, but we still have elements of it. But in the US, it was very, very, very dramatic. And as you can see, the number of people quitting has, after the COVID started, entered into its second, third, or fourth wave, so to speak. The quitting are getting increasing. They're accelerating, as you can see from the picture. And you ask questions, and the lives of people, once they were locked up, and they contemplated their life. Some wanted to change their jobs, others wanted to quit. Retired people forgot about active aging and said, look, once we'll continue like that, and it looks like it might be permanent for quite a while. Some for health reasons or family reasons, others they want to look after their kids who are not at school. So many reasons, but the upshot is, and this is of concern for us to find out more about this phenomenon, is what's going to happen in the labor supply. I mean, this is so important for our standard of living, for the output of the country. It's also for the potential output. And how are we going to interpret the lower participation rate, the lower inactivity rates, for our judgment when we come for policy making? And interesting is the shortages. Normally, a recession is followed by a falling demand. That's where the shortage lies, and the output is affected because of that lower demand. But here we're finding that demand, by the way, those are shortages, whether it's for labor, for demand, or for material. So you can see the green one is shooting up. That's the material and equipment shortages. Labor shortages is the brown bar, while the blue is the demand shortages, which are falling. So there are no demand is responding, is supply which cannot meet the demand for industry, and the same for the service sector, where material or equipment is not so significant as manufacturing, but we have the similar labor shortages as with industry. And we come to the methods of work. I mean, this is about telework before COVID and after COVID. For some countries where they could have measured it before, and therefore this has increased. That's something which is accepted. The question is, and here I come with these questions, is whether it's going to be better for productivity, better for the welfare. So studies are being carried out now, and the picture is so it varies. Normally, you'll find that the staff who don't want to return to work in general. They are happy with the sort of method of staying at home and working from home. But of course, they also are asked whether they're, working harder, and the answer is definitely yes. They feel they're working harder, more meetings and more emails to process. The picture is mixed with employers. They're not so convinced. So some people are fed up at home. So what is of concern is whether we should change permanently for some institutions. Some institutions have decided to reduce the space area, lease less buildings and less furniture, and with the idea that offices will be used, with the same sort of like shift work during the week, where one day is used by Mr. So and so, and the other one by lady, and so on and so forth. This is my personal observation. I think it's a bit too early to decide whether it's good for the institution or good for everybody. So one needs to study it more and see how we can maximize this, depending on the type of job, whether they're new ones, new recruits, team building, committees, and so on. I mean, in some meetings, the physical contact and cannot be substituted as yet with all this digital paraphernalia we have. Now I'm trying to sort of summarize, but so this is just perhaps in the UK with Brexit, this is much more obvious or showing more this inactivity and vacancies both rising, up to the point where it's being said that that there is almost now a job for every person out of work, which is unprecedented in the UK. But in the UK, as you know, immigration has fallen, and then they have the similar older workers dropping out of the labor force, and this is a quote that the legacy of the pandemic appears to be a rise in economic inactivity, which is very true. So I conclude with more questions than answers, unfortunately, but this is the idea. I think the idea is to say what's happening really, and how would that affect policy, and I have a set of questions here. First, we need to know who is really working and who isn't. We also want to know what the meaning now of various variables we've been using in our models, whether they carry the same meaning, how are we going to measure, hours worked when people are officially given a salary and reporting to work, but doesn't work for them. I mean, nobody would associate this kind of situation in developing countries, in poor countries where there is underemployment, but not in the advanced world where people would normally maximize their hours at their work. So yes, the same for active aging, whether it's going to be permanent or not. And then the last set is this labor turnover, because after the big resignation, lots of people actually are coming back, and with a different job. And so maybe this is good for the economy because people fit and they are enjoying whatever they are doing more than before. But these are the kind of observation we can make. Again, more studies will be carried out on people changing their lives and or the families, whether they are retiring even before they are 60. We don't know. We're just, at the moment, it's so close. The pandemic is not yet over. So we still have to see. But definitely it's devastating. I mean, as I said, this is a big shock and it will leave impacts on attitudes to work. But then we need also to change our toolkit and adapt it to this situation, because the labor market is, I'm not a labor market economist myself, but as an economist, I feel that we ignore this important variable to our detriment. I'll stop here, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Governor, for walking us through the labor market trends in the past months and years, and also for comparing it to past crises like the post-2008 crisis. I think the graphs that you showed were super interesting, and you really pointed out where some interesting observations could be made. You concluded with a lot of questions, but if I may, I would also like to ask you 1-2 questions. I think we have time for that, if that's all right. The first one came in from Nick, one of our guests in the audience. He is referring to the fact that COVID reinforced the transition to a digital economy with more gig-style jobs, switches between employment status, and becoming entrepreneurs, and so on. And the question related thereto is, what does this mean for Europe's valued social security and pension systems?
Yes, I think I can give a reply now. Now, that's a point which I left out in my presentation. It's a positive point. During the COVID, some of them are as big, like the digital, the advancement in digital requirements, and because we were forced to do that, and as we say, necessity is the mother of invention. So a lot of entrepreneurs, but even in service jobs like delivery of food to the homes, there's something which was an exception. Normally, people would prefer to go out and so on, but now it's been made, with all these apps, and an industry grew. Now it will decline definitely after this sort of, when we come to this so-called new normalization. But it's something which happened and made it so easy for many people, especially elderly people, that now it will continue. So these new startups, which like sprouts, they grew or sprouted during the COVID, will remain, and that's a positive thing. Now, we have to adapt. I mean, if the chancellor today is changing the welfare system in order to suit the needs, we need also to rethink the social security regarding pensions. I mean, we're always talking about entrepreneurship and how we want to catch up with the US in this area. So something which is beneficial with this advancement in digital technology, and made it, or forced us to use it, and will be a positive thing out of the various mixed bag we've had from the pandemic.
Thank you very much. That was very clear indeed. If you allow, maybe a second and at the same time last question to you, Governor. You already made some comparisons between Europe, the US in particular, sometimes also regions that are neither the US nor Europe. Maybe let's take a quick look inside Europe as such, where we have seen that the development in the labor supply has been to a certain extent heterogeneous across large euro area countries, at least during the pandemic. So some figures that I read recently point to the fact that the number of workers in labor force remains below pre-pandemic levels in Germany and Italy, for instance. It's close to pre-pandemic levels in France and Spain, and it's noticeably higher actually in the Netherlands. Why is that in your view?
Well, Europe has always been has always had a bias towards being like a benevolent employer or government, which was kinder to labor than it was in the US. I mean, this is not the word benevolent. Maybe it's not the right word, but we are proud of that actually in Europe. But it's a different model, and we it's hard to compare then policies because the US have done that. We have to follow because it's even in these small things they were had a big impact, as we have seen in all the charts. um, there were these discrepancies. So yes, we before we follow anybody's model, I think we have to look at our own, and ours is different. Now, of course, there will be, how would I say, not just challenges, but fears, or we have to be very careful, because we have, in some sectors, employees, we want to know, we cannot, how would I say, save declining industries. It would be wrong if, arising from these schemes, we're trying to protect the unprotectable, the industries which have to decline because there are no longer demand for them. So, I mean, between 2000, the beginning of 2020 or March of 2020, and today, we've already had we're close to 2 years. 2 years would have made so many changes in industry and the service industry. Some will grow, some will, because they are competitive. Other will decline because they are less competitive, different consumer tastes and so on. In the US, they are more aggressive, and what you see is what you get, and if the job is lost, you've had it. Now, of course, on the family and the person, that's not so good. But the point is, they will release labor to competitive industry, while in our model, it was good to stabilize the social situation as much as possible. People were guaranteed a job, and they were supported with the schemes, and they didn't need to be fired and re-employed. So that was so important from the start. But at the same time, as an economist, we need to say to ourselves, now, what is the downside of this? Is that we might prolong the labor in industries which, because of COVID, or even unrelated to COVID, they're on the decline, and they have too many labor than is required, because productivity will fall, and as a region will be less competitive. So there is the downside of it. There's the good side of it, but there's also the downside, which we have to be careful. So our policies, fiscal, especially the fiscal ones, should try and wean out labor from the excess, which is a remnant of the schemes we created, which cost us a lot of money. I mean, this is something which also is another element, the fiscal largesse, which was required on a very big scale. Deficits had to come down cumulatively to 12%. And definitely we were eaten from the future, unless we had reserves. For that reason, in order to save jobs, in order to to stabilize and calm the situation and so on. Yes, that's the good side, but there is a price to it.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor. And I think it's now time to bring today's ESBG Spotlight to a close. As always, we've had an extraordinary guest speaker. Thank you so much again, Governor, for being with us today, for sharing your analysis, your thoughts, your expectations on the labor supply, on the European labor market. It was a pleasure having you with us, and also thanks a lot for responding to the questions afterwards.
My pleasure too. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye, and this is for everybody in the audience, the goodbye, and also the thank you to you for participating, for asking your questions. We hope to see you soon again at the next ESBG Spotlight. Until then, stay safe and goodbye.